Today, I'm here to talk about one of the most important things that you would want to learn as a student and in your academics. So, when I was in college, one of the most important lessons I learned from my teacher was this. He called it ATQ, and it stood for Answer the Question. You think this is really obvious. This doesn't need to be told to you. Of course, you answer the question, but you would be surprised. So, if they're asking for something in a question, give them what they're asking for. So make sure you're addressing the question as it's asked, not what pops into your head. And so this was a very valuable lesson I learned, and I carried it through my academics, through my undergraduate and graduate school, and to this very day. I always try as much as possible to answer the question. And nowhere could this be more obvious than when it comes to something that you will see a lot in your academics. And this is why this is important to learn this. Is oftentimes, especially when it's a big project or something like that, the teacher will use a rubric. And this rubric is your guide. It is your map to answering the question. It tells you exactly what to do. And yet, I cannot tell you how many students of mine, from third graders to seventh graders to seniors in high school to graduate students in my college classes, do not read the rubric or pay attention to the rubric. And as a result, they don't get a grade that they're happy with. But one thing you have to keep in mind with the rubric is the rubric acts as two things. The first off, like I said before, it acts as a blueprint. So it is a blueprint for what you need to do in order to be successful in answering this question. Here, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. The second thing it does, and this is important, is it guides the grading. So as someone who is grading an assignment, I want to try to be as objective as possible. I don't want my own biases to enter in what it is I'm grading. So if a rubric is written really well, it does a good job of guiding this grading. And so I have to follow as the grader, I have to follow the rubric. And so I read over that rubric. I have that rubric next to me as I'm grading assignments. And I go through step by step by step to make sure that students have addressed everything in the rubric. And guess what happens when you don't address something in the rubric? Then your grade goes down or you get a lower score. And so being able to answer the question by reading the rubric and doing what the rubric is asking you to do is so important to your academic future and to your professional future. Because you're given rubrics sometimes in written form, sometimes not in written form, but rubrics are all over the place. And if you can follow those rubrics, if you follow what it's asking you to do, your chances of success are so much higher than if you don't. So here's a rubric so I can show you exactly what I mean. So this rubric is broken down into, this is effective collaboration role play rubric. And it's broken down into sections. It has the reflection on the content, the explanation of perspectives, and the script, role play, and the role play as an authentic assessment. So each of these is worth different amounts of points. So if you do the math here, each one of these is worth 10 points. So if it's out of 50 points, they're equally as important. So to really focus on this reflection of Module 3 content and ignore what's going on in the role play is not going to help your grade. You need to go through and make sure that you're doing everything it's asking you to do. And so one thing that you can do with your rubrics is before you even start an assignment is go through and start to identify the key things. So for example, when reflection on Module 3 content, it's asking that you explain the problem that will be addressed. So that's important. You want to make sure that you do that. It has to be relevant. So this has to be, and relevant specifically to current issues in school that were cited from Module 3. So if they weren't in Module 3, You can't just pick any old current issue. It has to be something that was talked about in the readings that you were doing. It should reflect how collaboration, consultation, and communication are all work. So if you just talk about collaboration, you've only done a third of what it's asked you to do. If you've only done consultation, communication, you're missing collaboration. So you have to give equal treatment to all three of those. So when I'm grading this out of 10 points, I'm going to be looking, did the student explain the problem? Was the problem relevant to what we talked about in the module? And do they specifically reflect on collaboration, consultation, and communication? If they've done all of those things competently, then I have no choice but to give them a 10 because they follow what it is. When you get down to these other things, only 2 of the 3 criteria meet, 1, none. So that's what happens is when you're missing things, I have no choice but to take you down and score. So this goes down to an 8 if you're missing 1, 4 if you're missing 2, 0 if you're missing them all. So if you skip an entire section, if you don't have an explanation of perspectives, that's a 0 out of 10. That's going to wreck your grade. That right there puts you at 80% already if you're at 50. So you do this for the whole rubric. You have to make sure that the explanation reflects learning from 2 and 3. So whatever was learned in modules 2 and 3, the explanation that you give has to reflect that. You have to explain communication styles. You have to discuss biases. And this one was a really easy one. These are just what they are. You don't have to read between the lines here. It tells you exactly what you need. For the script, you need to have a written script. You have to have 5 points or questions. You have to have a parent and teacher in the role. And so if you do all 3 of those things, you have a written script, you have 5 questions. Doesn't even say they have to be 5 great questions. It just says you have to have 5 questions. So, or in end, you have to have someone playing the parent role and someone playing the teacher role. Seems really obvious, doesn't it? And yet, I'll have people do this assignment and they don't have a parent in the role. They'll do a teacher and a student. So you have to follow that rubric. So you can, like I said, continue on through it. So at least 2 classmates have to participate. There has to be interaction. In other words, it can't just be one person speaking and then it cuts, and then another person speaking. There has to be interaction back and forth. And in this one, they have to place themselves in someone else's situation. So they have to role play. That's why it's called role play. They have to role play someone else. Lastly is the role play as an authentic assessment. They have to make sure that they're active and engaged. So and this is not necessarily based on the quality of the work, but this is just like trying to get a good performance out of people. So they should be somewhat engaged in what they're doing. They should use decision-making skills when they're making their decisions. And they should use interpersonal communication skills. So again, you do each of those 3. I have no choice but to give you a 10 out of 10. If you're missing 1, I have no choice but to give you an 8. If you're missing 2, a 4. If you're missing them all, a 0. And so that's what I would do with my rubrics if it were me, and this is what I've done in my academic career, is I'll go through and I highlight exactly what it's looking for. And I'll print out this rubric and have it next to me as I'm working on whatever it is that I'm doing. So I'll have it there, and then I'll start to create it, and I will just go through and check off. So then what you can do is you can say, okay, that I have to do that. Did I do that? So you can mark it as with italics that, yeah, I did that one. Okay, I can make sure I did that one. I did this one right here. So you can mark that as so you can go through and start marking it as you do them to make sure that you haven't missed anything or overlooked anything. Here is another example of a rubric. So here it's broken down into 3 parts. You have the presentation, you have the structure, and you have the persuasiveness. If you look, there are no points assigned, and so you can assume that all 3 are equally as important. So if you focus all of your attention on the presentation, but you're not persuasive at all, then you're not going to get the grade that you want. So you have to pay attention to what it's asking you. So when you go through here, again, you try to highlight what it's asking for. So here, this is pretty easy. It's asking that presenter gives good pace and tone. So you may have to define what that looks like. It says it can easily be understood. Any good rubric is going to show you what it looks like, not just tell you. So it says here good pace and tone, but then it says what that looks like. And then here, you have to have appropriate body language. And you may say, what is appropriate body language? And it shows the passion they have for the topic. Speak clearly and fluently. And so what does that mean? That it's all the words can be understood and you use very few ums. But it boils down to these three things: tone and pace, body language, fluency. If you do those three things and you do them well, you do it like it shows you to do them, then you're going to benefit with a good grade. Same thing with structure. You must use hooks. And it says it says hooks. It doesn't say hook. So that's another thing. If it says plural, I, as the evaluator, am going to be looking that you used multiple hooks because there's more than one there. And what does a hook do? It engages the audience, which is what is explained here. Introduction needs well developed. So what does that mean by well developed? It's explained there. Same thing with the closing being well developed. And then this one always baffles me. Sometimes it can be very specific, like the speech needs to be between 9 and 11 minutes. So if you're in that range, then you're going to get an excellent. Real simple. You either do it or you don't. And yet some people just don't do it. And they give you no choice but to mark down. So in here, maybe it ended a minute early or maybe even more. And I would be down the needs improvement area. When it comes to persuasiveness, I need to have compelling visuals. I'll have this rubric on here and students will give a presentation and not have any visuals. I'm like, where are your visuals? And they're like, oh, I didn't have any. It says right there in the rubric. So if they don't have it, I have no choice but to mark it here in the needs improvement because it wasn't there. Similarly here, it says that you have to share a personal story. And so that has to be in your speech. So far you have to have visuals, you have to have a personal story, and then it says here you must use statistics or information. Why? Because you want to make a clear connection to the argument. But if you're missing any one of these elements, then again, you're going to get marked down as a result. So again, if you want to answer the question properly in a course and you're given a rubric, that rubric acts as a blueprint. It tells you exactly what it is that you need to do. There should be if it's written well, there should be no confusion on what you have to do in order to be successful. But every time you leave something off of that's on the rubric, that you don't have it in your work, the evaluator has no choice because they're guided in the grading by this rubric. So my suggestion to you is before you start any work that involves having a rubric, before you write a single word, before you even think about it, sit down with the rubric, go through and identify the key things it's asking for, and make sure that you give them those things in your whatever it is that you're producing, whatever product that you're making. Make sure that it's there. And then you'll see wonderful results because you've done what the rubric asks or what the teacher has asked or what the course has asked of you. And we can't ask anything more than that. And that's the other thing about a rubric that's so important from the teacher perspective is I'm not allowed to grade things that aren't on the rubric. So if I think that spelling and grammar was an issue, but it wasn't on the rubric, I can't grade that. It's not there. So that guides me on what I have to do as the teacher as well. So keep in mind, your instructors, your teachers, we are beholden to that rubric. And we grade you based upon that rubric. So if you follow that rubric and you address all the issues or all the questions in that rubric, then you will have answered the question and you will get a good grade as a result.